Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming, and I sincerely hope that what you hear will make it worth your while and that you'll feel like you've come away with something that's of use to you. My goals for this talk, the first and primary goal is to enjoy God's good creation. Okay? The second goal, less than that, is to actually present some things I've learned about fossils and their occurrences over the past 35 years or so, 35 going on 40 years. Lastly, as a goal, I intend to enjoy talking with Marcus Ross. Marcus is a guy I like a lot. He knows his stuff, and you can hold me to these goals. I'd like to introduce myself a bit. I've got a lot of slides, so I'm going to try to read my talk. I apologize for that. It'll make it a little bit stilted. I'd like to introduce myself just a bit through this mascot, the Devonian coral hexagonaria. I graduated from a state school in 1975. In fact, I can remember reading papers as a young Christian anthropologist written by a guy named Stephen Austin. Okay. Then worked for several years after that as an epidemiologist. So only after that did I start taking courses in geology and paleontology. And in 1980, a laboratory teaching assistant clued me into a locality where I could go collect Devonian fossils that outcropped in central Missouri. I collected a whole bunch, but this one is, I think, particularly beautiful. I love it. And it sits on my desk today as a wonderful reminder of beauty in God's creation. Note that this coral is assigned on the basis of anatomy, and anatomy only, to an extinct order, the order Rugosa. Now I'll remind you that in the Linnaean taxonomic hierarchy, the word order is a technical term, and in order to make an order extinct, you have to extinct all of the subcategories beneath it. So there are a lot of species in each genus. There are a lot of genera in each family. There are a lot of families in each order. So in order to make that order Rugosa go extinct, it means a lot of creatures were extincted along the way. So our first chapter today will be a quick look at some of the fossils from Devonian Age Strata, starting with some in Michigan where this quarry is located. Okay. Now I have to back up for a second and emphasize firstly that the stratigraphy of the Midwest is a terrific place to learn one's Paleozoic fossils. The area is far from the margins of the continent, which means it hasn't been crashed and banged around a lot. The strata are relatively undeformed. They form a really, really nice layer cake. In fact, that's the general geologic joke for this stuff. It's a nice layer cake of sedimentary strata that are usually from 1 to 2 miles thick, occasionally 3. In the center of the Michigan Basin where I live, it gets up to about 3 miles thick. And the rock layers are all shallow water sedimentary rocks. You can ask me about that later if you wish. But the strata are gently warped into these broad regional structures. And the nice thing about that is it means that you can actually buzz around laterally on the Earth's surface. You can walk or ride a horse like they did 100 years ago, or drive a car. And in fairly quick order, you can actually sample directly one layer after another. And this is a cross-section on the lower right of the Michigan Basin, which is a local down warp. It's very, very shallow. The picture there is actually misleading because the vertical and horizontal scales are not the same. It's been compacted into one thing so it can be put onto a page. The vertical scale only goes up to about 3 miles depth in the center of the basin. But on the lateral scale, it's a couple hundred miles. So the reality is that these rocks are nearly flat-lying, but they're ever so gently warped. Okay? And they form this sort of concentric bullseye pattern as you look down on the lower peninsula that's focused at the center of a series of stacked saucers of rock. Okay? Notice that we've got lots of oil and gas in Michigan. We're like the 19th state right now. We were up there a little bit further. That means there's lots and lots of oil and gas wells. And forget about the water wells. There's many, many more thousands, which means we have a very, very good control, mental and graphical control on what lies beneath our feet. The oil geologists in Michigan know the subsurface like the back of their hand. So we know what's down there. This is the Lafarge Limestone Quarry, located in the city limits of Alpena, Michigan, on the shores of Lake Huron. I have visited this quarry at least 18 times. I've lost count, to be honest with you, and always in the company of students from various institutions. The quarry is visited by hundreds of school kids and rockhounds every year as well. Now, these are just a few of the groups, and this is while I've had a digital camera, so I started taking pictures of the groups back in 1990. But these are just a few of the groups that have accompanied me to the quarry. We now have a substantial collection of these fossils at Calvin College. My students, of course, have collected more. I find it hard to repress the desire to collect, even though I know I don't have space to store them. So I have boxes of uncurated fossils back there. You can buy these things, by the way, at the scientific supply houses, and they'll charge you an arm and a leg. So I actually could make these trips self-sufficient, but I haven't tried that yet. Some of my students have tried to sell things on eBay. Okay. These are good memories. Now, here's a question. These folks are A, having a boring day of wasted time, or B, having a great day enjoying God's creation. Thanks. Someone said B? Yeah, that's right. B is right. Okay. And anticipating an interesting question, I know a lot of real devout Christians are concerned about the issue of death before the fall. And this issue continues to be raised, particularly by atheists, who really like to harp on, well, how could God have gone to all that waste? He has all these creatures that died off before the fall, and there's lots of animal pain and suffering and death. And what I ask you to think about is, what are those kids thinking about and their families? Are they thinking, oh, how could God have wasted all these lives and caused all this pain? Or are they thinking, this is really cool. I'm so glad God gave us these little relics of this former world that we can delight in and collect and put on our shelves back home. It's actually the latter, in case you were wondering. Okay. This is actually in situ in the rock where it's exposed by blasting. The same genus of coral as I collected in central Missouri back in 1980. It's the genus Hexagonaria. Now, corals grow, they reproduce sexually and asexually, right? They grow by budding. The bottom of the colony is right here. A few individuals or one settled out. It then branched laterally. It grew upwards. It fanned out to make a big head of coral. At points along the way, some of it died back and then resurged. So we actually can see the original growth framework. With this and many other examples go for right here, and of course the people blasting the quarry are in effect dissecting it for us, is they're revealing an ancient coral reef, an ancient fossil ecosystem. And I would argue that the reef is in place. It has not been transported to any significant degree. Now there are some flood geologists that tell us that, not all, but some flood geologists tell us that these things have been transported in place, so the reef has been bodily washed into place en masse. Okay, maybe yes, maybe no. Fossil corals wash out of rock ledges under the Great Lakes, where they're tossed by the surf, they're rounded, they're cast up on shore, and they're avidly collected by rockhounds. In Michigan, we call them Petoskey stones. Petoskey stones are further polished by rock lovers, and they're put into paperweights, bookends, and even jewelry, earrings and that sort of thing. They're so pretty. They are soft, they will scratch, so that's a beware kind of a thing. And lo and behold, the Michigan Petoskey stone is the exact same coral genus as I collected in central Missouri. I have friends that just don't get that. They think that somehow or another Petoskey stones, the word Petoskey is a Michigan state city. How can Petoskey stones be somewhere in another place in Missouri? You know, Michigan has a corner on that, right? They don't. Okay. These are more extinct invertebrates, marine invertebrates that accompany the Petoskey stones. And they're gorgeous. They're part of God's good creation. The sporiferid brachiopods here are from the extinct order Sporiferida. The trilobite here is from the extinct subphylum Trilobitomorpha. No trilobites have existed since the end of the Paleozoic. You won't find a trilobite in today's oceans. Okay. These are kind of representative fossils. This is order Rugosa here. That's what you've seen already. Hexagonaria. Favicites, a member of the order Tabulata, extinct order. Allopora, a member of the Tabulata as well. Atropa, member of the Atropida, an extinct order of brachiopods. The trilobite Eldrogeops. Once again, they're all extinct and they're all members of extinct groups of organisms. This is a reconstruction of the ecosystem of Michigan in the late Devonian. The predators that prowled among these reefs included prominently placoderm fishes, some which were small, some large, some herbivores, some predators. They don't extend stratigraphically above the Devonian. There aren't any today. And Eurypterids, sometimes colloquially called sea scorpions. Once again, some herbivorous, some carnivorous. They get up to be 9-10 feet long, and they don't exist today either, and they haven't existed since the Paleozoic. So this slide bears a little bit of discussion because you're going to see it again multiple times. Some things that we have never collected in the Devonian of Michigan include teleost fish. So today, there's roughly around 30,000 species of bony fishes, almost all of them belonging to the Teleostii. They include all of our familiar freshwater and marine fishes, like tunas and sunfish. And there's not a single one in the deposits in Alpena. Diatoms. Now, an aquatic biologist would assume, a modern aquatic biologist would assume, all things being equal, that these are the common phytoplankton in today's lakes and oceans. Not a single diatom in the rocks in Alpena. No sand dollars or sea urchins. No scleractinian corals. So this is the one order of corals that we have today. A beachcomber in Florida or a snorkeler in the Bahamas will experience scleractinian corals, but they will not find them in Alpena. And likewise, they will not find the orders of Alpena corals in today's beaches or oceans. No dinosaurs. No marine mammals like porpoises or whales. No flowering plants, today 300,000 species, the dominant type of plant. And here's just a couple more for fun. These are Mesozoic fishes and they're just more of the same. No lobsters, no pterosaurs or any winged creatures of any kind. So that's an interesting question, one would think. If a global flood that's moving very, very fast, tsunami-like, why wouldn't there be one, perhaps just one, winged creature of some kind, a bat or a bird or something like that? Certainly not a pterosaur. Let's now expand our geographic range. So these are other places where the stars are that I have collected fossils in place in limestone outcrops or quarries. And now we're talking about 40 trips or so, and once again, because of the gentle warpings of the structure of the rock, these are all the same rock layers that I'm sampling here. For example, Hungry Hollow, Ontario. It's a favorite place for Ontario people to collect fossils. The road down here, you can't read it, that's labeled Fossil Road. And Coralville Reservoir, Iowa. What a name. You drive near Iowa City, Iowa, and the little town of Coralville comes up. What's that all about? Well, there's lots of quarries in Iowa City, Iowa, delving into Devonian Age limestone rock. And here, a couple of floods, one in 1993 and one in 2008, wiped out a campground and exposed these beautiful limestone ledges. This is now a public fossil viewing area. It is public land. You may not collect there as much as you would like to. You can see signs that people have tried to collect there, but it's there as a treasure for anybody and everybody. This is what we see. Brachiopods, familiar brachiopods. This is a sporiferid brachiopod, extinct order, extinct corals. Whoa, that's my old friend Hexagonaria. The same thing I collected in mid-Missouri in 1980 and in Michigan many, 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 many times, and there it is in 2017 in central Iowa. We've got here a classic Devonian coral reef. These folks are, I don't know these folks, I just took their picture. They probably thought I was pretty creepy. They're having a boring day of wasted time, or B, having a great day enjoying God's creation? The answer is wrong. Okay, they're having a great day enjoying God's creation, and those kids are learning something about beautiful, beautiful past marine creatures, but they're nothing like the current marine creatures. They are physiologically and ecologically, but not anatomically. So, some things that we have never collected in Devonian strata in the Midwest now, I've expanded it out. What about below the Devonian layers? Okay, so once again we can exploit the three-dimensional structure to the rocks by traveling laterally, and we'll work our way in the appropriate direction. We'll work our way down, dip, and down into the strata below. And by driving south towards the Cincinnati area, I will drive back. So we were looking at Devonian Age strata. We're now driving downward into the Ordovician. Ray Troll gave me permission to use this, in case you're wondering. These are Calvin College students having fun, enjoying God's creation on the outcrop in southern Indiana, in central Ohio, and we've looked in northern Kentucky as well. Once again, we have a very nice collection of these fossils at my institution, and I've taken a couple hundred students down there to look at these things. But I've seen vans there from Pennsylvania and Chicago, and rockhounds from Detroit. A pair of rockhounds from Detroit gave me a ride one time when I locked myself out of the van and had to find a locksmith. So people come from hundreds of miles away to these outcrops. They are so famous. They bleed fossils. Okay. What do we see here? This is a rugosan coral. It's in the same group as Hexagonaria. It's a solitary. Extinct order of brachiopods Strophomenida. Extinct order of bryozoan Cystiporida. Beautiful trilobites. This is the Ohio State fossil. It gets up to 12 to 14 inches long, and it's elegant. Usually these things are torn apart because they're delicate, so you find fragments. I've got lots of fragments back at Calvin. Okay. These are amateur fossil collectors working in 1938. For well over a century, the area has been avidly hunted by amateur fossil collectors who have piled these things up by the thousands, perhaps millions, in basements and garages and all that sort of stuff. You know, it's always these sad stories about kids who have the box of fossils in the garage and their parents throw it away. They're angry about it. There's an active rockhound club that's been in existence for 70-odd years, and you can join them if you choose. Okay? Some things that have never been collected in Ordovician rocks in the Midwest. What about above the Devonian layers? Once again, we can travel laterally, and we're working our way upwards in this section here in the Michigan Basin. In my case, I can drive 1 hour, a little less, from Calvin College and be right in the Pennsylvanian rock. These are students measuring stratigraphic section. They're doing a formal laboratory exercise for which they will be graded. Despite that fact that they'll be graded, Isaac Jacques is here, A, having a boring day of wasted time, or B, having a great day enjoying God's creation. The answer is B. That smile is, he didn't just put that on for me. He's actually having fun, I hope. I like the guy. At any rate, what are we seeing here? Gray shale, sandstone. In the sandstone ledges, one finds plant roots. That's a lateral root. It's a stick through and as long as my forearm. Okay, I've got a slab like this that we brought back that's chock full of these lateral roots. The lateral root is one that Paleozoic paleontologists will recognize as belonging to the tree Lepidodendron. Lepidodendron is a giant club moss. This is a reconstruction of a Carboniferous swamp. The plants are all archaic ferns, seed ferns too. This is a horsetail today, Equisetalis. There's about 16 species worldwide, and they get up to about 1 meter height. And this time they're 20 feet tall. And this is Sigillaria. These are not modern-day club mosses. So today none of them are as tall as a foot. And back then they grew up to be substantial trees. Above the layer of the roots there is a thin seam of coal. Okay, what do we see below the lateral roots? These are carbonized root traces. They extend downwards for over a meter, and in many cases I can trace them back up to the carbonized root above. So I understand well that Steve here has worked on catastrophically transported mats of vegetation, and I respect him for that, and don't doubt that that occurred. But in this area, we have a fossil forest with a rooted zone. Okay, so the roots extend downwards. I would argue that this represents an actual ancient swamp that grew in place. And we have to remember that in the Michigan Basin structure, if we go downwards 1,000 feet or so, we encounter the coral reefs below them. So what do we not find? We don't find any of the invertebrates that we find in the coral reefs. What also do we not find? We don't find any of these modern day creatures, including any flowering plants. So just to drive the point home, the phylum Angiospermophyta today includes upwards of 300,000 species that are named, that we know of already, more being named all the time. They produce flowers, and there are zero flowering plants in this old ancient swamp. Okay? So that ancient biota, did not include flowering plants. If we briefly, just for fun, extract ourselves and go to northwest Germany, this is the Bagger 288. It's the world's largest vehicle. It was built at a cost of $100 million. These are trucks down here for scale. You can't unfortunately, these lights make it hard to see. If you know the idea of a transformer, there's jokes online that actually reconstruct this thing as a transformer. We'll go back. Any rate, I like this verse. But you don't spend $100 million on a machine if you don't have an economic product out of that and you don't understand some basics of geology. Okay? Nor do you spend $1 billion building an oil platform and drilling if you don't have an understanding of what you're drilling into. Now this is the reconstruction of that plant community. Once again, it's a Carboniferous plant community, They have the exact same kinds of plants that we do in central Missouri or West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Iowa, or Illinois, and no flowering plants. So globally, we have this biotic assemblage that has lots and lots of the same kinds of things and no flowering plants. So we've wandered from the Devonian down to the Ordovician, up to the Pennsylvanian, these rocks that are collectively called Paleozoic. The name coined by Adam Sedgwick back in the early 1830s. We'll remind you of that later on. And what have we seen? We've seen a succession of biotas in the mid-continent that I have trod upon. I totally agree with Steve. I like to talk about things that I've seen and delighted in, and I know he has delighted in the things he has seen too. That's part of the fun of the discipline. Okay. Well, what about if we go maybe just a couple thousand miles further afield to the Grand Canyon of the Colorado River? We do understand that it has become a creationist icon of sorts. Steve helped to co-edit this book back in the early 90s, and I take him to task a little bit on that, and I will here, but I acknowledge that he's a great experienced field geologist in the Grand Canyon. What do we see in the lower layers? Nice Cambrian trilobite. Because of lack of time, I skipped a lot of middle layers. Uppermost layer of the Grand Canyon, productine and conidid brachiopods. These are beautiful brachiopods belonging to extinct orders. And all these guys are the same ones that I learned when I was learning paleontology back in around 1980 in central Missouri looking at Carboniferous deposits. Some things that have never been collected in Paleozoic strata of the Grand Canyon. So, once again, these are all the kinds of, and so all you have to do is go downstream, down the Colorado River to the northern Gulf of California, you'll find all these things in today's world. So, the question for me, myself, is why in a catastrophic flood just a few thousand years ago, does this biota that we see today differ radically and nearly completely from the biota preserved in those catastrophic flood layers? So unfortunately, there's some chapters on fossils in this book, and they don't really delve into that issue, not like I would like them to. They do discuss fossils, they name orders like Rugosa and Tabulata, but they don't explain that one doesn't find rugosa and tabulata in today's ocean. Just another commercial for the book. Greg and Ken are here, and they're selling it cut rate. It's a good looking book. If nothing else, it's getting lots of great reviews for the fact that the photography is excellent. And I say much the same things in my chapter on fossils in that book as you hear me saying today. So, William Smith, working about 200 years ago, is given credit for establishing the fact that fossils occur in assemblages and in a regular ascending order in the rocks. This is his famous geologic map of England, large thing, colored. There's a book out called The Map That Changed the World. It's not a particularly great book, but it's a catchy title, and it does indicate that it's an interesting map. This is one of his colored cross sections across southern England, indicating these successive layers of tilted sedimentary rocks. This is his table of strata from 1815. That idea was captured by Alexander Braun, who's a fabulous French geologist. He took it back across the channel. He and Georges Cuvier, the great paleontologist, worked up the stratigraphy of the Paris Basin. They found much the same thing that Smith found over in England, albeit on a smaller geographic scale. And they realized there was a succession of fossils that one found regularly repeated in the rocks. Okay, that idea was taken on the road then by a small army of field paleontologists in the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, eventually fanning out to this continent and then eventually later on to South America and then abroad. Adam Sedgwick, for example, ordained Anglican minister, devout evangelical Christian, was the first named professor of geology at Cambridge University. Sedgwick worked up the stratigraphy of the Cambrian system and defined it, gave it the name Cambrian. He did the same thing for the Devonian and gave the name Devonian, and he coined the word Paleozoic. So here you have three words coined by an evangelical Christian. It turns out that the vast majority of the names that we associate for these geologic time periods were coined by evangelical Christians. Now, not all of them were. Some were coined by deists. But the vast majority were coined by evangelical Christians working in the first half of the 19th century. So the very jargon that came into existence to describe the ascending order of these biotas was coined by Christians. Now, that was assaulted in a big way, in a very vicious way, by George Macready Price in this country in the early part of this century. Price lived a long life, as you can see, and he wrote many books. He considered that this was his masterpiece, The New Geology, written in 1923. It's a thick book. It's written as a textbook. It has lots of photographs. I did a complete search on those photographs many, many years ago, and most of them are cribbed from the U.S. Geologic Survey. That in and of itself is neither here nor there, but it's indicative of his unfamiliarity with rocks in the outcrop. So Price, in several locations in his publications, not just once, but multiple places, explains that this is what geologists do when they order the fossils in the rocks, right? They actually have a preconceived idea of what the order is, and then they just file them away. So, I find these Devonian fossils up in Alpena. What do? Well, I look under D for Devonian, and I file them away under Devonian for D. Okay. Well, unfortunately, that notion was taken up and continued by Henry Morris and John Whitcomb when they produced their classic treatise of modern flood geology. They worked on it, of course, in the late 50s, published it in 1961, and same sort of story there. They treated people that disagreed with them rather viciously, and they maintained this idea that geologists had a preconceived notion to the ordering of fossils, and they simply put them where they want to. So you have an idea that, well, the simple fossils are at the bottom of the column, we'll stick these strata in there, and so on, and working our way up into more and more complex things. As a sort of continuation of that sort of attack mode, we just consider one example. Now, I could have brought up lots. I have a slide here illustrating a quote from George Macready Price, another one illustrating a quote from Morris and Whitcomb. And I do regret, Stephen, that you worry about your work being trivialized. but these guys demonize their opponents. Okay? So my buddy Dave Young got an award from the Geological Society of America, Mary Rabbit Award. I was there at the dinner when he got the award. It's an award for the history of geology because he wrote a comprehensive history of igneous petrology. Dave got up and gave his little acceptance speech for the award. Half the acceptance speech was his Christian testimony. This is what he gets on this end. If you Google Dave Young and Ken Hammond, the same thing, this will pop up. So any of you can access this unless he takes it down tonight. Compromising Christian professor receives accolades from secular world. Well, that's it, isn't it? He must be a creep, right? Davis Young is professor of geology emeritus at Calvin College, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Dr. Young taught for many years at Calvin College. That's where I am, of course. A well-known Christian, in quotes, college. So I'm only at a Christian college. At any rate, he goes on and on and on. Not pleasant. So we don't need trivialization. We don't need demonization either. So I went to the web recently and just pulled these off easily. You can find dozens more where people compare what geologists do. And interestingly enough, there were DVDs today about circular reasoning. Now, they didn't involve fossils. But here the idea is that geologists have a preconceived notion of what the fossil order must be. And so when they find a fossil fauna, they merely slide it in George McCready Pricean library card catalog style to where they think it belongs. Well, that's not correct, okay? The order to the fossils was discovered partially before Darwin was born, partially while he was a kid. So Darwin grew up actually knowing that there was an order to the fossils. That was one of the things he tried to explain. The order is there regardless of your explanatory paradigm, whether it's a flood or an ancient earth, the order is there, and it's something that must be dealt with. This is interesting here. This is a New Jersey website, New Jersey Creationist Group website, and it's maintained by a couple of PhDs, one in computer science, one in mathematics. These people are extremely bright. Don't get me wrong. So there are a lot of extremely bright people out there who are making this claim, but they turn out to be extremely bright engineers, medical doctors, anatomy professors. A.E. Wilder Smith, who's a guy I respect a lot, had 3 earned PhDs in pharmacy and biochemistry. He makes the same claim in his writings. Engineers, there's a lot of engineers in the ranks of the Young Earth creationist movement, and a lot of them are, once again, they're extremely bright, but they believe what they've been told about the ordering of rocks, of fossils in rocks. They need to spend several years doing what Steve advocated and actually going out and putting their face on the outcrop, or like those little kids going around and picking up fossils. They might just enjoy part of God's good creation in the process. Now, to be honest, Leonard Brandis, whose name has already been mentioned, and multiple others within the flood geology community have taken a different tack, and they've actually built a case that you could build a flood model base that incorporates an order to fossils ascending in the rocks. So I give Brand a lot of credit, okay? I still don't agree with him completely, but I give him a lot of credit. And even Andrew Snelling, once again, a guy I disagree with a lot, but Snelling in his magnum opus 2-volume update of the Genesis flood says there is an order to fossils in rocks. So I guess one of the pleas I have here for you, let's see, is whatever we do, let's advance the discussion by encouraging people not to do this, particularly as regards the ordering to fossils in rocks. This reveals ignorance. It leads to slanderous accusations, and it also leads to scorn by the geological community, who know a lot better. So we're almost done. Goals for this talk: enjoy God's creation, present some of the things I've learned about fossils, and to eventually hear Marcus and enjoy talking with him. These black items here actually belong under item 2. Fossils occur in intact ecological suites. Biotas occur in regularly ascending orders. Within a given suite, there do lie evidences, now not always, because there are some catastrophic death assemblages, for the passage of significant time. I call these intrinsic timekeepers. They would include, for example, trees that exist through many different layers of sandstone. That would be an argument for a local case of very, very rapid sedimentation. There's no doubt about it. And I have seen those fossils at Joggins. So I know they exist, and I've got pictures of them. My own pictures are crummy because they were taken at sunset, but I've got other pictures. At any rate, they exist. So catastrophic death assemblages and rapid sedimentation patterns do occur, but you also see things here like the root assemblages in the swamps there. So I think abundant evidence exists for protracted succession of life forms on Earth. My final question is, when I collected this, I was having a boring day of wasted time, or I was having a great day enjoying God's creation. And that should be the real punchline beyond all this. Too many times the discussion is hijacked into ones of using this stuff as ammunition for one or another individual's perceived culture wars, instead of saying, there's some really interesting things to see here that God has given us, and in some ways they're crumbs off the table, but they're really, really choice crumbs. And so there's that. Okay? Thank you.